In the bitter winter of 1911, the inhabitants of Saint-Breuil maintained their daily routines, cultivating their fields and securing their doors well before nightfall. Then the livestock began perishing. Peculiar tracks materialized in the snow, and the nights grew disturbingly silent. A single howl echoing from the ridge was sufficient to inform them that something unprecedented was hunting in their valley. They were utterly unprepared for what emerged from the darkness. So, before we continue, please make sure to subscribe and let us know where you're watching from. Thanks that I arrived in Saint-Breuil during the autumn of 1911, when the first frost lingered upon the fields well past morning. The railway deposited me in a larger town, and from there, I traveled in a modest cart drawn by a weary horse. Woodlands, fields, and barren vineyards passed in an unrelenting blur. I had accepted the position of schoolmaster because I desired steady employment and a tranquil village. The inspector's correspondence had mentioned only isolation and harsh winters, nothing more. The driver, a weathered man named Henri, hunched over the reins and smoked as he navigated the rutted road. For an extended period, he said nothing. Only when we departed the main thoroughfare and turned into a narrow lane beneath towering pines did he finally speak. "You know why the previous schoolmaster departed, monsieur?" he inquired. "I was informed he married and relocated to Limoges," I replied. Henri produced a brief sound that resembled anything but genuine laughter. "That is the account they committed to writing," he said. "People prefer it that way." The wheels jolted over deep ruts. The trees stood oppressively close on either side. No birds called out. The silence felt unnatural, threatening. What truly transpired? I asked, my curiosity outweighing my better judgment. He discovered one of his pupils in the ditch beside the forest, Henri said, his voice dropping lower. Her throat was torn clean out. They claimed it was a wolf. Men from 3 villages combed the hills and killed nothing. After that incident, he remained a few weeks longer, then departed before dawn and never returned. He spoke without raising his voice, yet his hands trembled slightly upon the reins. The inspector had not written a single word regarding a deceased child. The omission now seemed deliberate, calculated to lure an unsuspecting replacement. "There are wolves everywhere in these regions," I said, attempting to sound reasonable. "There are," Henri acknowledged. "But the elderly folk in Saint-Breuil speak of more than wolves. If a cow perishes in the night or a child falls ill, they assign it the same name." He fell silent once more. We passed a weathered stone cross at the edge of a field. Someone had left dried herbs at its base, a ritual that spoke of old fears and older beliefs. "What name?" I pressed. Henri kept his gaze fixed upon the road ahead. "They say the wolf walks upright," he said at last, the words heavy with reluctance. "They say it wears a man's skin by day." I came from a town with gas lamps, libraries, and a public reading room. At the teacher's college, we spoke of science and progress with absolute confidence. I told myself that Henri was merely repeating village superstition that inevitably surfaced when something unfortunate occurred. Even so, in the gray light beneath those oppressive pines, his words settled heavily upon my shoulders like a physical burden. When the forest thinned at last, the land opened into a shallow valley. Small fields lay scattered on the slopes, divided by stone walls and ragged hedges. At the center, perched upon a low rise, stood Saint-Breuil, a cluster of stone houses, a crooked street, a small square, and a church whose bell tower leaned slightly to one side, as though weary from decades of service. Thin smoke rose from a handful of chimneys. The village appeared ordinary enough in daylight, yet something in its configuration suggested defensiveness, as though the buildings had been arranged to face outward against some unnamed threat. Henri brought the cart to a halt before the inn. A woman in an apron emerged, wiping her hands upon it. Her hair was graying, tied in a practical knot. Her forearms were strong and capable, speaking of years of manual labor. "Jean, this is Monsieur Delorme, the new schoolmaster," Henri announced. "He has arrived in an unlucky year." "Enough of that," she said sharply, though her eyes studied me with frank assessment. "Monsieur, your room is prepared." We heard you would arrive before All Saints' Day. I climbed down with my case. The village smelled of damp earth, wood smoke, and animals. Familiar scents that should have been comforting, but somehow felt ominous here. Several children watched from doorways and slipped away when Jean turned her head, as though accustomed to making themselves scarce. "Come inside," she said. "You can eat whilst we send word to the mayor." The main room of the inn was low-ceilinged and dim, with blackened beams and a wide hearth. A pot hung over red coals, releasing an aroma of stewed meat and vegetables. Two men sat at a table near the fire with a jug between them. They stopped speaking when I entered, their conversation dying mid-sentence. "This is him," Jean announced. "The new master." The men nodded in acknowledgement. One was tall and lean with a sharp nose and a scar bisecting his chin. The other was shorter and broad-shouldered with rough, calloused hands and pale, watchful eyes. Jean named them without ceremony. "Marcel hunts in the hills," she said. "Etienne works the communal land." Marcel rose to shake my hand. "Welcome," he said. "You will discover the children here are stubborn. When work is needed in the fields, they vanish like morning mist." "I shall endeavor to make the classroom worth their attention," I replied. Etienne regarded me with a slow, measuring look. "You have chosen an unfortunate year," he said. "The harvest failed. Then the beast returned. People believe God no longer listens to our prayers." Jean set a bowl of stew and bread before me and interrupted him firmly. "Let me eat first," she said. "There is ample time for talk afterwards." "I am not so easily frightened," I said, though my voice lacked the conviction I had intended. Marcel's mouth tightened in a thin smile that suggested he had heard such bravado before and knew how it inevitably ended. Jean was still tending the hearth when the mayor arrived. Monsieur Gua was a portly man with a neat mustache and a reddened nose that spoke of fondness for wine. He grasped my hand in both of his and spoke in a strong, practiced tone perfected over years of public speaking. "Saint-Breuil is honored, monsieur," he said. "The Republic remembers even our smallest villages." "I am pleased to serve," I answered formally. Gua seated himself and poured a generous measure of wine. "You travel by the Pine Road," he said. "Then you understand how close the forest lies. At night, it seems even nearer than in daylight. Still, we are not children easily frightened by shadows. There have been incidents, certainly, but we shall not lose our rational judgment." Marcel's jaw tightened noticeably. Etienne stared at the table with studied intensity. "Some sheep, a cow, one death," Gua continued, waving his hand dismissively. The prefect dispatched gendarmes. They returned with empty hands. People here speak of curses and monsters. That is precisely why we require a proper school. You will provide our children with something superior to antiquated tales and superstitious nonsense. "I shall try my utmost," I said. "Classes commence Monday," he replied. "Until then, rest and familiarize yourself with the village. If you hear howling during the night, remain inside. The hunters are vigilant. There is absolutely no cause for alarm." He pronounced the last words with careful emphasis, as though repetition might transform hope into reality. That night, I lay in a narrow bed beneath the roof. The mattress smelled of straw and age. Through the small window, I observed the dark line of the opposite hill and the pale curve of the road winding through the valley. The village lay quiet beneath the stars. I told myself that the unease constricting my chest stemmed from the journey and the strangeness of unfamiliar surroundings. I mentally reviewed the names to steady my thoughts. Henri on the cart, Jean at the inn, Marcel the hunter, Etienne the farmhand, Monsieur Gua the mayor. I attempted to picture the classroom I had not yet seen, imagining rows of students and the satisfying routine of lessons. Each time I closed my eyes, however, I saw instead a ditch at the edge of a forest road and a child's desk with no one sitting at it, a permanent absence that would haunt whoever filled that position. The first howl came after I had extinguished the lamp. It rose from the direction of the forest, long and harsh, then broke in a manner that sounded distinctly unlike the calls I had heard from wolves during past hunts. A second answered from farther down the valley. A third sounded closer, somewhere beyond the last houses at the village edge. I lay absolutely still, listening intently. Below, a door creaked open. I heard quick footsteps, Jean's low, urgent voice, and a heavy scrape of a bolt being drawn across wood. Then only the wind against the tiles and the blood pounding in my ears. I had heard wolves before during my youth in the countryside. Their howls possessed a rough rhythm, a natural cadence. These cries carried a strange rise and fall that made the skin on my arms prickle with instinctive dread. I told myself it was merely fear and weariness combining to distort my perception. I pulled the blanket up to my chin and forced my muscles to relax through sheer will. The howls grew fainter, drifting toward the distant hills. At last, without any clear moment, when wakefulness ended and sleep began, I slid into a hard, dreamless sleep with my hands still clenched in the blanket, that I woke to the smell of fresh bread and coffee and the rhythmic sound of someone chopping wood behind the inn. For one brief, merciful moment, I forgot the howls entirely. I was simply a man in a new village with a day to prepare for his first class. Then memory returned in a sharp rush, and I lay still, listening carefully for any indication of alarm. The valley was quiet. No cries, no voices raised in panic or grief. Light came pale and cold through the small window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Downstairs, Jean moved briskly between tables with practiced efficiency. A pot steamed invitingly on the hearth. She set a bowl and cup before me without asking what I preferred. "You heard them," she stated rather than asked. "Yes," I answered. "Are they always that close?" "Sometimes they come nearer still," she said. "Last winter, they circled the communal barn. The sheep would not calm for days afterwards." She watched my face carefully, searching for signs of weakness or determination. "You still have time to return to the town," she said. "The inspector would find another position for you elsewhere." It sounded almost like genuine concern, not mockery or contempt. "I signed a contract," I said firmly. "Children here require a school as much as those in the city. Hal shall not send me fleeing." She wiped her hands on her apron. "Words are easy in daylight," she said. "Wait until the first proper snow falls." After breakfast, I followed the main street uphill toward the school. The houses were clustered close together near the inn, then spread apart as the street climbed. Chickens scratched in small yards. A woman hung linen on a line, glancing frequently toward the forest with obvious nervousness. Two boys rolled a wooden hoop and stopped to stare at me with frank curiosity. When I nodded in greeting, they ducked their heads and ran off as though I might bite them. The school stood on a slight rise at the far end of the village, positioned near the open fields. It was a plain stone building with two narrow windows and a small bell suspended over the door. Behind it sat the teacher's house, low and square, with a fenced garden that had gone to weeds. Both structures needed paint desperately. Still, when I stepped inside the empty classroom, I felt a small lift of satisfaction and purpose. There were 3 rows of wooden benches, a blackboard still bearing faint traces of previous lessons, and a map of France with the new departments marked in neat lines. Dust lay thick on the desks. Chalk fragments rested in a metal tray. The previous schoolmaster had departed in considerable haste, leaving everything in disarray. A book lay open on the front table, its pages curled from damp. I opened windows to admit fresh air, swept the floor, and aired the room thoroughly. As I wiped the blackboard clean, I pictured the faces that would sit before me in just a few days' time. The villages I had known as a boy had been noisy, full of shouts and quarrels, and the ordinary chaos of childhood. Here, even in daylight, there was a restraint I could not adequately name, a wariness that seemed unnatural in the young. Near midday, a knock sounded on the doorframe. Marcel leaned there casually, his cap in his hand. "We'll want you at the church," he said. "The council meets before the feast day. They want you to hear what they intend to tell the people." I thought a schoolmaster answered to the inspector, not the mayor, I said somewhat defensively. "In the books, yes," he replied. "Out here, you answer to whoever can send you meat in winter or leave you with only potatoes to survive on." He said it without hostility, simply stating an obvious fact of rural life. We walked together down the street toward the square. A bell clanged once, twice, then stopped. Clouds had thickened overhead, making the afternoon unnaturally dark. The forest on the distant slope looked darker still, almost black against the gray sky. Several villagers moved quickly about their tasks, eyes lowered, speaking in hushed voices. At the church door, Etienne stood with his cap crushed in his rough hands, speaking to an elderly woman wrapped in a thick shawl. Her back was bent with age, but her eyes were sharp and intelligent. She broke off her conversation when she noticed me approaching. "This is Madame Fournier," Marcel said quietly. "She remembers every unfortunate year for 60 years back. When she speaks, people listen carefully." Madame Fournier took my measure with a steady, unflinching look. "You are the new master," she said. "You believe letters and numbers can drive away what walks out there in the darkness." "I believe fear grows in ignorance," I said, meeting her gaze. "If children learn to think rationally, they may not see monsters everywhere they look." "Not everywhere," she said, "only where they actually exist. Be careful, young man. You must not teach them to doubt what can genuinely kill them." She turned and entered the church without another word, leaving me unsettled by her certainty. Inside, the air smelled of candle wax and damp stone. Light entered through small windows set high in the walls. The painted saints adorning the walls were faded and peeling. At the front, near the altar, stood Gua, the priest, and two elderly men I had not yet met. They broke off their low conversation when we approached. "Ah, monsieur," was said, "we meet to agree upon how we shall speak of recent events, particularly before the feast. Panic helps absolutely no one. You understand?" The priest, Father Lauren, was thin with hollow cheeks and serious, haunted eyes. His cassock hung loosely on his gaunt frame. "People come to me with their fears," he said. "They speak of curses, of bargains made with things in the dark. I tell them God does not abandon his flock. Yet each new death makes it considerably harder to maintain their faith." "How many deaths?" I asked directly. There was a brief, uncomfortable silence. "One man in summer," said one of the elders, a cooper named Simon, "found in the marsh with his chest torn open. Then the girl by the road, as you have undoubtedly heard, and animals, too many to count accurately." "Wolves attack livestock," I said. "That is hardly unprecedented." "These wounds are unlike any bites," Marcel said quietly. "I have hunted wolves all my life. I know precisely what their teeth accomplish. What we discovered is entirely different." Gua spread his hands in a soothing gesture, though his thumb rubbed his palm in small, nervous circles. "The prefect says wolves," he said. "We say wolves. That is the end of the matter. If anyone speaks of other possibilities, we call it superstition and ignorance." "Do you agree, monsieur?" I understood what he wanted from me. If the schoolmaster laughed at tales of werewolves and supernatural creatures, others might follow his example. The educated man from the town dismissing peasant fears. "I shall teach what the official manuals prescribe," I replied carefully. "I shall not repeat stories that frighten children without good reason." "That is sufficient," he said, clearly relieved. "We ask only that you do not give weight to antiquated legends." Father Lauren looked toward the door, where a patch of pale sky showed through the opening. "Legends begin somewhere," he murmured, "but we shall not argue about that presently." When we departed the church, the square had filled with people bringing offerings for the coming feast. Baskets of potatoes, jars of preserved fruit, sacks of grain. Women clustered in small groups, speaking in low voices. Men checked the wheels of carts and the harnesses of animals. Each person seemed to watch both the church and the forest simultaneously, as though unable to decide which posed the greater threat. As we stepped down onto the worn stones, a shout came from the far edge of the village. A boy of perhaps 12 years ran toward us, hair wild, breathing hard with exertion and terror. His name was Luke, as I would later learn. At that moment, he was simply a child with absolute terror blazing in his eyes. "They got another one," he gasped. "At Ragman's field near the stream. It's torn to pieces." People around us fell instantly silent. Someone dropped a sack. Grain spilled onto the stones in a pale cascade. "What did you see?" Marcel asked, gripping the boy's shoulders firmly. Blood in the snow, Luke said. The sheep are dead. Not eaten, just lying there torn apart. My father sent me to fetch you immediately. His face went gray. He turned to the priest. Go back inside, he told Father Lauren. Ring the bell. Bring people in. Tell them to pray. He paused, then looked directly at me. You may come if you wish, he said, or you may remain here where it is safe. I hesitated. Part of me desperately wanted to retreat into the dim church and pretend this was merely gossip and exaggeration. Another part, smaller but harder, wanted to see with my own eyes what had caused such terror. I knew that if I stayed behind, I would always doubt the truth of what was reported to me. I shall come, I said. We followed Luke down a narrow path between houses, past gardens and sheds, toward the lower fields. Others trailed behind at a distance, murmuring in small groups. The path sloped toward the stream where a thin sheet of ice had formed in the shallows. Ragman's field lay beyond, a poor patch of ground enclosed by a broken fence barely standing. The smell reached us before the sight did. It was sharp and heavy, a mixture of blood, wet wool, and something else I could not adequately name, something feral and wrong. Marcel's steps slowed noticeably. Etienne, who had joined us silently, crossed himself in a hurried gesture. When I stepped into the field, my stomach clenched violently, for sheep lay scattered near the fence. Their bellies were torn open, ribs showing pale and stark in the cold air. Their legs jutted at awkward, impossible angles. Snow around them was stained dark with congealing blood. They did not eat, Marcel said in a flat tone. This is not hunger. He knelt by the nearest carcass and examined the wounds with careful, experienced hands. I stood back, breathing shallowly through my mouth. I had seen slaughtered animals before, certainly, but always in an ordered setting with knives and clear purpose. This was fundamentally different. There was a wildness in the way the bodies were thrown about, as if something had moved through them in one swift storm of motion and violence, then simply departed. Luke watched me carefully, perhaps to observe whether the new schoolmaster would faint or disgrace himself. I forced myself to look at each animal in turn, to note the pattern of the gashes, the torn flesh, the chaotic marks in the snow. I told myself that if I paid sufficient attention, I might discover some detail that made rational sense of it all, something that could be named, measured, and explained by natural law. Tracks, Etienne said hoarsely. Near the far corner of the field where the fence sagged dangerously, the snow was churned and disturbed. Prints led from the forest edge, crossed the ditch, and entered the enclosure with deliberate purpose. At first, I thought they were wolf tracks, large and deep. But when I stepped closer, I saw that some marks were not shaped like an animal's paw at all. They were elongated with a narrower rear section and a wider front, as if something had pressed down with toes possessing considerable weight. Deep claw marks scored the snow ahead of them. Between these prints lay impressions that looked disturbingly like a man's bare foot, but far too long, with the ends splayed into sharp points. Wolves do not step like this, Marcel said. His voice was even, but the skin around his mouth was tight with suppressed fear. Nor bears. I have seen bears in the higher valleys. Their claws marked the snow quite differently. Will looked away, his face flushed. You see what fear accomplishes, he said sharply. We stand in a bloody field, and our minds twist every mark into a nightmare. We say wolves. We shall tell the prefect the same. Anything else invites ridicule and interference. He stared at me intently. You agree, monsieur? Behind him, Luke's eyes were fixed on my face with desperate hope. Etienne's jaw clenched. Jean, who had followed at a distance and now stood by the fence, waited without speaking. The choice they were asking for became perfectly clear to me then. If I echoed Gua, I would stand with the part of the village that wanted desperately to hold on to order and normality. If I sided with the hunters and the old woman with her sharp, knowing gaze, I would give weight to the terror already spreading among them like contagion. I have never seen tracks precisely like these, I said slowly. I also know that fear can trick the eyes into seeing what is expected rather than what is actually present. What I can say with certainty is that calling it a wolf does not change what actually killed these sheep. It was not the answer anyone wanted. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The only sound was the weak rush of the stream and the faint clatter of the church bell beginning to ring in the distance, summoning the fearful to prayer. Marcel rose from the carcass and wiped his hands on the snow. "Whatever it is, it came from the forest," he said. "It will come again. We need more than prayers and empty words." He looked directly at Gua. "We hunt tonight," he said, "with or without the council's blessing." I followed them back toward the village with the cold pressing through my coat and into my bones. The bell in the church tower rang steadily, calling people in. The sound drifted down the slope and over the fields. It should have felt reassuring, a familiar sound of community and faith, but the steady toll only tightened the unease in my stomach. Marcel walked ahead, eyes constantly scanning the tree-line as if expecting movement at any moment. Etienne stayed close to him, shoulders rigid with tension. Luc lingered near me, still breathing hard, as though afraid that if he allowed distance to grow between us, whatever had crossed the field would return for him. When we reached the first houses, people stepped out to question us anxiously. Faces lined with worry searched our expressions for reassurance or confirmation of their worst fears. We'll push through them and raise his voice with forced authority. "It was wolves," he announced. "Nothing more. Those who wish to pray should go to the church immediately. Hunters will keep watch tonight." Several nodded quickly, eager for any explanation that allowed them to return to their routines and pretend normality still existed. Others exchanged looks filled with profound doubt. A few children clung to their mothers' skirts, staring at the hunters' bloodied hands with wide, frightened eyes. Jean was waiting near the inn with her arms crossed. "Wolves do not kill like that," she said quietly to me. "They take what they can eat. They do not leave the rest scattered as a warning or a message." Her calm tone unsettled me more than a shout would have. "I know," I said, "but if I say that openly, it will cause more fear." "Fear already fills this valley," she replied. "Naming it will not change its presence." She turned to Marcel, who was checking the straps on his rifle with methodical care. "You will need help," she said. "We will," he replied, "but not from everyone. Some of the men panic too easily and would endanger us all." "I did not say I would join you," she said, "but I can cook for those who will watch. They cannot hunt on empty stomachs." Her matter-of-fact tone steadied the men around her. Marcel nodded in gratitude. By late afternoon, the sky darkened enough to make people hurry through their remaining tasks. Smoke rose from chimneys as fires were built up. Shutters closed early. I spent several hours arranging the classroom, writing Monday's lesson on the board, and placing the children's copybooks in careful stacks. When my work was done, I lingered at the window. Snow fell softly in uneven flurries, melting as it touched the ground. I thought of the tracks in the field. I had tried to put them out of my mind, but every time I closed my eyes, the shape of them returned with disturbing clarity. I searched for some rational explanation. A large dog, perhaps. A wounded animal with a strange gait. A trick of thawing snow, creating deceptive impressions. Each possibility fell apart when I remembered their size and spacing, the deliberate pattern of their placement. At dusk, Jean called me down for supper. The inn's common room was lit by 2 oil lamps and the glow of the hearth. A pot of stew simmered slowly, filling the air with the aroma of meat and vegetables. 3 hunters I had not met before sat quietly with bowls before them, their boots muddy from the hills. All had rifles beside their chairs, close at hand. Marcel entered last, bringing a gust of cold air with him. "We set traps near the lower ridge," he said. "If anything crosses tonight, we will hear it." "Are these men all you have?" I asked. "For others watch the upper road," he said. "The rest are either too old or refuse to go out after dark." He pulled up a chair and loaded his bowl with stew. "You could remain here," he said to me. "No one will think less of you." I found my narrow bed upstairs. I pictured lying there listening to the howls grow closer, wondering what was happening, whether men were dying whilst I cowered in safety. The thought sickened me. "I shall come," I said. Marcel studied me for a long moment. "You do not need a rifle," he said. "Stay behind us. If we tell you to run, you run without question or hesitation." I agreed readily. After supper, the hunters prepared to depart. Each checked his weapon, pack, and lantern with practiced efficiency. Jean handed them small cloth bundles with bread and dried meat. "For strength," she said. "Do not waste it." The men thanked her. Even in their grim mood, they understood that she cared for every life in the village and that her practical concern was a form of blessing. Outside, the night had fully settled. A thin frost crackled under our boots. The moon had not yet risen, leaving the valley in darkness broken only by our lanterns. We walked past the last houses and down toward the lower fields. The silence was almost complete, broken only by our breathing and the soft clink of metal against cloth. At the edge of the field, Marcel lifted his lantern and examined the snow carefully. "No new tracks," he murmured. "Good." He pointed to a flat rock where I could sit if I grew tired. "You stay behind this line of stones," he said. "We will circle the perimeter. If anything moves, stay low and do not shout." The men spread out. Their lanterns formed a loose arc around the field. The stream nearby murmured faintly. For a long whilst, nothing happened. My mind wandered in nervous loops. I counted my breaths. I listened to the crunch of the hunters' boots as they patrolled. The cold pressed into my hands until the skin stiffened. I shifted constantly to keep blood moving. A distant howl broke the stillness. It came from the forest, faint but unmistakable. It rose quickly, held at an unnatural pitch, then dropped in a broken pattern that made the hair on my neck lift. Marcel stopped moving. The light of his lantern swung slowly. "That is the same voice as last night," he said. "It is calling something." Another howl answered from farther down the valley. This one was shorter, sharper. It did not sound like any wolf I had heard. The men tensed visibly. One of the younger hunters, a man named Julian, moved closer to Marcel. "Should we fire a warning?" he whispered. "No," Marcel said. "If we scare it now, it will return where we cannot see it." The howls died away. The stillness that followed felt heavier than the sound. Time passed without movement or incident. I began to think the night would end with only fear and no discovery. Yet a part of me knew that the silence itself carried a warning, that something was watching and waiting. I must have lost track of the hour. The lanterns flickered low, their oil running out. Frost thickened on the grass. I shifted my weight again and again to keep warm. Then a soft crack sounded near the stream. Every head turned instantly. Marcel raised his lantern. Its light reached only a short distance, leaving the trees in impenetrable shadow. "Something is down there," he said quietly. Etienne crouched beside him, rifle raised. Another crack came, this time closer, a branch being pushed aside, a footstep heavier than a fox or deer or even a wolf. Without speaking, Marcel moved toward the stream. The other men formed a slow semicircle behind him. He held his lantern high. The light slid over reeds, the thin crust of ice, and the pale trunks of trees. Nothing moved. "Do you smell it?" Julian whispered. At first I did not. Then it reached me, a sharp, thick scent of wet fur, blood, and something older I could not adequately name. It coated the back of my throat like oil. Marcel gestured for the men to spread farther apart. I stayed behind them, my heart pounding against my ribs so hard I feared it might be audible. The rustling came again, deliberate and slow. "Hold," Marcel said. The reeds parted. A shape stepped into the lantern glow. At first, I could not understand what I saw. Its height was wrong, its posture wrong, its outline shifting between what my mind knew and what it refused to accept. Coarse fur covered its limbs. Its shoulders were narrow, but rising high. The head was long and wolf-like. The jaw hung open with breath that steamed into the cold. Its eyes reflected the lantern light in a pale, fixed glare. It did not move like a wolf or man. Its steps pushed against the ground in heavy, deliberate motions that spoke of weight and purpose. Julian made a strangled sound. The creature lifted its head and looked directly at him. Then it let out a single bark-like sound that hit me like a physical blow to the chest. "Stand firm," Marcel said, voice low but steady. The creature shifted its weight as if measuring us. My breath caught. Then it took a step forward. The creature's forward step pushed the reeds aside with a slow, deliberate movement. Its chest rose and fell with steady breaths. Its gaze moved from Julian to Marcel, then to the rest of us. Every part of its posture suggested control, not confusion or panic or animal instinct. This was something that thought and calculated. Marcel raised his rifle, but did not fire. "Do not shoot unless it charges," he said. His voice stayed calm, but I saw tension in his jaw. The other hunters tightened their grips on their weapons. Julian's hands shook so badly that the barrel of his rifle tapped against a stone. The creature stood fully clear of the reeds now. The lantern light revealed the thickness of its limbs, the roughness of its fur, and the way one of its forearms hung slightly lower, as though it carried more weight on that side. Its breath came in heavy bursts that sent small plumes into the cold air. It stared at us without fear. I felt my legs weaken. I tried to steady myself by focusing on details. The way its fingers ended in long points. The dark patches of dried blood on its lower jaw. The uneven shape of its ears. Each detail only increased my dread. Etienne took a slow step back, careful not to make noise. His gaze stayed trained on the creature. "We cannot outrun it," he whispered. "I know," Marcel said. The creature tilted its head. The movement was slow and deliberate, as though it were studying us with the same attention we gave it. For a moment, the entire field held its breath. Even the stream behind it seemed to fade from my hearing. Then a shout broke the stillness. Luke, who had been told to remain behind with the others near the village edge, had followed anyway. I saw him out of the corner of my eye, running toward us without caution or sense. Before I could shout for him to stop, he slipped on the frost and fell forward with a sharp cry. The creature's head snapped toward him with frightening speed. "Get him!" Marcel shouted. Julian dropped his lantern and sprinted toward the boy. The sudden movement broke the fragile stillness. The creature growled. The sound vibrated through the ground beneath my feet. Julian grabbed Luke by the arm and pulled him up, but the creature began to move toward them with measured steps that grew faster with each stride. "Back!" Marcel yelled. "Back to the stones!" He fired a shot into the air, not at the creature, but high above it. The blast echoed down the valley. The creature halted abruptly. Its chest heaved with focused breaths. It looked from Marcel to the boy, and then let out a short, harsh sound that did not resemble any animal call I knew. Julian reached us with Luke in tow. The boy clung to him, trembling violently. The creature took another half step, then stopped again. Its body tensed in a way that made every muscle visible beneath its coarse fur. Marcel kept his rifle trained on it. "We break for the village," he said without turning his head. "Do not run unless I tell you to." No one argued. We began to move. Slow steps, no sudden actions. The creature followed. Its strides matched our pace exactly, always staying just beyond lantern range. Each time we slowed, it slowed. Each time we paused, it paused. The sound of its steps pressed into my bones. Heavy, intentional, measured. It was hurting us. When the first roofs came into view, a bell rang again from the church tower. The sound stretched through the air in long, uneven strokes. Lights flickered behind shutters. Shadows moved inside houses. The creature stopped at the last field before the village. It watched us walk the final stretch. Then, with a sudden turn, it slipped back toward the forest. Its retreat was silent enough that I strained to hear even a branch crack. Nothing came. Only when it disappeared into the dark did my breath escape in a rush. Luke sobbed quietly in Julian's arms. Marcel lowered his rifle slowly. "We cannot stay out there again," he said. "It is not afraid of us." Etienne wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "It followed our steps like it already knew them," he said, "like it had watched us before." Jean met us at the inn door. She saw Luke's face and pulled him into her arms without a word. Her expression was tight with worry, but not surprise. She had expected this. "You saw it," she said. Marcel nodded. "We saw enough," he answered. Inside, the hunters gathered around the hearth. No one wanted food. No one wanted drink. Their silence carried more weight than any outburst would have. Julian stared at the floor. "It looked at me," he said quietly. "It knew I was the one who moved first." "You are alive," Jean said. "That is what matters." I sat with my back against the wall, hands still trembling. My mind replayed the creature's measured steps, its steady gaze, the way it had mirrored our movements without effort. "It let us go," I said. Marcel shook his head. "It did not let us go," he said. "It learned us. There is a significant difference." We did not sleep that night. Each time the wind brushed against the eaves, someone lifted his head. Luke sat wrapped in blankets near the hearth, refusing to close his eyes. Jean stayed awake, moving quietly among us, adjusting the fire, setting water to heat, checking the shutters. Just before dawn, the church bell rang again. 3 short strikes. Gua had arranged a signal with the hunters. 3 strikes meant something was wrong. Marcel rose immediately. "We go," he said. He looked at me. "You do not have to come this time." I stepped forward anyway. "I shall come," I said. The square was full of people by the time we reached it. Some carried lanterns, others stood in their night clothes. Father Lauren stood at the church steps holding a candle. Gua met us with a pale face. "It took a man," he said. "Old Bertrand behind his barn." A murmur spread through the crowd like wildfire. "Show us," Marcel said. Gua led the way down a narrow lane to the edge of the village. Frost glimmered on the rooftops. The barn stood open. The ground near it was disturbed. Several villagers knelt there, whispering prayers. When we reached them, they parted. Old Bertrand lay on his back. His eyes were open, staring at nothing. His chest was torn in a single brutal strike. Blood had frozen in dark patterns across his coat. His hands still gripped the lantern. The glass was cracked, as though something had struck it hard. Tracks surrounded him, the same prints from a field. Only this time, they led deeper into the village before turning back toward the forest. Marcel crouched over the body. "It is hunting closer," he said. "It is watching how we move, learning our patterns." Wood trembled. "What do we tell the people?" he whispered. Marcel stood, his face set. "The truth," he said, "because anything else will kill us faster." He looked toward the forest. "We hunt again tonight, but next time I will not watch. It will come for us." The villagers stared at him, waiting. "Whatever this is," he said, "it will not stop. Not until we end it." The crowd around Bertrand's body grew thicker as more villagers pushed forward, drawn by the sound of whispered prayers and the grim stillness of the hunters. No one dared to speak above a murmur. Even the children sensed the weight of what lay in the frost. I tried to read the expressions on the faces around me. Fear, anger, disbelief, but most of all, resignation. They already understood that the boundaries they relied on, the fields, the fences, the night watch, no longer protected them. Marcel pulled a blanket from a nearby cart and covered Bertrand from the neck down. He rested one hand on the old man's shoulder for a brief moment, bowed his head, then stood. "We cannot leave him here," he said. "Take him to the church. The priest will prepare him." Villagers stepped forward without being asked. 2 men lifted the body with slow care and carried him toward the square. People parted as they passed. Some crossed themselves, others whispered the man's name. Behind them, a woman I did not know sobbed softly, clutching her shawl to her face. "Who found him?" I asked Gua. "His son-in-law," he said. He heard a sound in the barn. By the time he reached the door, it was too late. Did he see anything? "Only movement," he said. "A shape." He said slipped away before he could even cry out. I looked at the doorway of the barn. Scratches marked the wood, not the kind left by tools or animals. Long, deep angle with force. My skin tightened. "Tracks go past the well," Etienne said, pointing toward the narrow lane. Marcel knelt near the edge of the frost-dusted road. He traced one of the prints with his glove, studying the depth and angle. "It was not running when it left," he said. "Its steps are too steady." It walked through the village as though it knew no one could stop it. Jean approached then, wrapped in her thick winter coat. Her eyes went to the covered body, then to the hunters' faces. "It will not stop there," she said. "It has taken animals. It has taken child. Now it has taken a man near his own door. You cannot expect it to give us another night to prepare." "We are not expecting anything from it," Marcel said. "But we will be ready." "How?" she asked. "We hunt before sundown," he said. All of us, not just a few. Gasps and murmurs rose from the crowd. "You cannot ask the whole village to go into the forest," Gwis said. "They are farmers and craftsmen, not soldiers." Then we stay here and watch it take us one by one, Marcel replied. You saw the prince. It walked the length of the lane. It could have tried doors. It could have taken whomever it wanted. His words struck the crowd like cold water. A tall man near the back stepped forward. His cheeks were hollow, and he wore an old hunting coat, mended in several places. I will go, he said. If we stay in bed whilst others fight, we are no better than prey. Another man followed, then a third. Soon others nodded in agreement. Fear lived in their faces, but something else had begun to take shape beneath it. Resolve, faint but growing. Will looked overwhelmed. He had never intended to lead men into a forest with rifles and lanterns. He looked at the priest for support. Father Lawrence stepped forward, his hands clasped. If you do this, he said, you must remain clear in your purpose. Do not go seeking vengeance. Do not let fear guide your actions. Search for the truth of this thing. Do what is necessary, but do not lose yourselves in the process. His voice did not quiver, even though his eyes were shadowed with dread. Marcel nodded. We will not lose ourselves, he said, but we will not stand idle either. As the crowd dispersed, I remained near the barn. The tracks in the frost disturbed me more than the body had. They were not just signs of violence. They were signs of familiarity. The creature had walked among us, unhurried, unchallenged. That understanding settled into my chest like a weight. Julien came up beside me. It moved like it knew where everything was, he said. It did, I replied. You think it has been watching us longer than we knew? I did not answer. I did not need to. The hunters planned to gather at the inn before dusk. Until then, I worked in the schoolhouse, though I found it impossible to concentrate. Every sound outside made me glance toward the window. I tried to write notes for Monday's lesson, but my thoughts drifted and my handwriting came out uneven. I forced myself to stop before the chalk snapped in my hand. By late afternoon, I decided to walk the village to clear my mind. The air was sharp with cold. Smoke rose from chimneys. People spoke in low voices as they gathered firewood or carried water from the well. Mothers pulled their children inside as soon as they saw me. Even the animals seemed restless. Dogs barked intermittently, and a few horses stamped their hooves as though unsettled by some scent I could not detect. When I passed the house, the mayor stepped out, tightening his coat. His face was strained. You are preparing a hunt, he said. I can see it in your eyes. Whatever I said before, I cannot stop you now. You saw the tracks, I said. You saw what it did to Bertrand. He exhaled sharply. Reasonable men do not go chasing monsters, he said. But perhaps the time for reason has passed. Will you join us? He looked toward the forest. I am not a hunter, he said, but I will not hide either. If the village goes, I go. It surprised me. For all his attempts to deny what was happening, he had enough pride or guilt to stand with the others. We walked together back to the square in silence. By sundown, 20 men had gathered at the inn. They carried rifles, axes, pitchforks, and lanterns. Their breath clouded in the cold air. Jean stepped out with baskets of bread and cheese. Eat now, she said. You will need strength. No one argued. Marcel addressed the group. We follow the tracks into the forest, he said. We stay together. No one breaks from the group. No one fires unless the shot is clear. If it circles us, we tighten formation. If it flees, we do not chase blindly. You think it will wait for us? Someone asked. No, Marcel said. But it will watch. It will always watch. I stood among the men, my heart pounding. I did not belong there. I knew that, but I cannot step back. If I left now, shame would follow me long after this night. When we moved out, lanterns formed a wavering line along the path. Snow crunched under our boots. The forest grew darker with each step, swallowing our light little by little. By the time we reached the first ridge, the moon had risen, casting pale illumination across the treetops. The cold deepened. The air smelled of pine, damp earth, and something metallic. Etienne raised a hand. Tracks, he said. Marcel crouched and studied them. Fresh, deep, heading into the darkest part of the woods. Julien swallowed hard. It wants us to follow, he whispered. Marcel stood. We follow anyway. We pressed deeper. Branches closed over our heads. Lanterns flickered against trunks and roots. The silence grew heavier. Every step felt like a step away from safety and closer to something that understood us far too well. Hours passed. The tracks continued. They were never hurried, never frantic. Then Etienne halted again. "Marcel," he murmured. "It has changed direction." Marcel studied the ground. "It is circling." A realization passed through the group like a chill. "We are not hunting it," Julien said. "It is hunting us." Marcel did not deny it. "Keep formation," he said. "Lanterns up." We moved again, but fear seeped into every step. Then from somewhere behind us, a twig snapped. Another crack followed, then a low sound between a growl and a breath. Every lantern swung toward the noise. The trees shifted with shadow. Something moved just beyond the light's reach. A second crack echoed through the trees, sharper this time, as if something heavier than any deer or wolf stepped on a frozen branch. The men tightened instinctively, lanterns lifting in a trembling arc. I felt the cold settle deeper into my chest, as though the air itself thickened. Marcel raised his arm for silence. No one dared to breathe loudly. The forest around us seemed to close in, its branches like unmoving watchers. I turned slowly, lantern held just high enough to light the ground at my feet. The space beyond its reach looked endless. Another sound came. Not a snap this time, more like a slow, steady pressure on snow and leaves, as if something large placed its weight with precision. "It is behind us," Etienne whispered. "It is everywhere," Julien muttered, voice breaking. Marcel shook his head. "No, one set of tracks, one creature." But even he sounded unsure. The lantern light flickered over the trees again, and I thought I saw movement. A brief shift, a darker shape behind a trunk. As I stared, trying to understand whether it was shadow or figure, a low, rough exhale drifted through the air. The creature's breathing. Close. Marcel took 2 steps forward, raising his rifle. "We hold," he said. "Do not break." As soon as he spoke, a thud came from our left. The men turned, rifles lifting. Another thud echoed behind us. The forest erupted in cracking branches. For a frantic moment, I believed we were surrounded by more than one creature, but each sound came in fragmented, deliberate bursts, as if a single thing was testing our direction and reactions. The creature was moving fast. It was circling. Something scraped the bark of a tree near me. I swung my lantern. Deep claw marks scarred the trunk fresh. The resin still gleamed in the faint light. A shout burst from the back of the group. "It's there!" Everyone spun. A large shape darted between 2 trees, too fast to see clearly, too quiet for its size. The lanterns caught only glimpses. Fur, breath, a curved back disappearing behind a thicket. Julien stumbled backward. "It knows we're scared," he said. "Stay together." Marcel snapped. Lanterns forward. We shifted into a tighter cluster. Lanterns raised, rifles outward, but the forest became its ally. Every trunk, shadow, and hollow gave it place to hide. Every step we took seemed to reveal nothing but more emptiness. A distant howl rose, but not the full, echoing call from nights prior. This was shorter, deeper, a signal, a declaration. It was close. The howl died. Then came silence, more complete than before. "Do not move," Marcel whispered. We froze. Breath clouded the air. Somewhere behind me, I heard someone quietly sobbing into his scarf. Guillaume muttered a prayer under his breath, his voice trembling. Then the forest floor shifted. The creature stepped into the ring of lantern light. Its entire shape finally revealed. It stood upright on elongated legs, its shoulders hunched upward, its arms hanging low, ending in fingers tipped with curved claws. The fur was matted with dried blood and dirt. Its chest rose and fell in slow breaths. Its face, wolfish but not fully wolf, watched us with an unreadable intensity. The eyes reflected lantern glow in a pale, steady glare. Every man froze. Marcel lifted his rifle slightly. "Hold," he said, but the creature did not advance. It stood staring at us as though calculating. Its breaths came louder, filling the space between trees with uneven rhythm. No one dared to breathe loudly. No one dared to whisper. Then the creature stepped forward. Julian panicked first. He fired. The shot tore through the quiet, echoing off every trunk. The creature jerked back, not from the impact of the bullet Julian had missed, but from the sudden, uncontrolled action. The men exploded in noise. Lanterns swung, rifles lifted. The creature reacted instantly with a growl that tore through the cold. It lunged into the lantern light. Everything broke at once. The men scattered. Some moved back. Others tried to form a line. Julian fell in the snow. Etienne grabbed him and pulled him up. Wood dropped his lantern. It shattered, spreading oil across the ground as the flame struggled. The creature's hands swept out. One of the hunters, Alan, was hit across the chest. He flew backward with a cry, landing in a heap. His lantern rolled and went dark. "Form up," Marcel yelled, but his voice was drowned by shouts. The creature moved with brutal speed. It leapt toward Marcel. He fired at point-blank range. The shot struck fur, but the creature only staggered before charging again. Marcel dove aside. Its claws slashed into a tree trunk where he had stood an instant before. Another hunter tried to flank it. The creature swiveled and caught him by the arm. I heard a crack. The man screamed. The creature threw him to the ground. The rest of us stumbled backward in a loose ring. Lanterns flickered wildly. Shadows moved too quickly to understand. I held my lantern up, but my hand shook uncontrollably. Each breath felt thin. The creature stood over the injured man, snarling. It turned its head. It looked directly at me. A freezing shock went through my body. I could not move. Its gaze held mine as though weighing me, understanding me, deciding something. Then it stepped forward. I stumbled back. I tripped on a root and fell onto the snow. My lantern tilted and nearly slipped from my hand. The creature advanced, closing the distance in long strides. "Hey!" Marcel's shout cut through the panic. He stood behind the creature, rifle raised, breath ragged. The creature pivoted. Marcel fired again. The bullet struck its shoulder. This time, the creature roared. A low, deep, furious sound that made my teeth feel as though they were vibrating. It lunged at Marcel. Both disappeared into the dark. "Marcel!" Etienne yelled, running toward the sound. The rest of us followed in staggered fear, lanterns whipping light across the trees. Branches scraped our coats. Snow crunched in frantic rhythms. We heard another roar, then the thud of bodies colliding with the ground. When we reached them, both were down. The creature struggled to rise, hit hard by the shot. Marcel lay on the ground, trying to push himself up with his elbow. Blood ran down his temple. His rifle lay several feet away. The creature planted a hand on the ground to stand. Etienne did not hesitate. He raised his axe and swung. The blade struck the creature's neck. A heavy, brutal sound followed. The creature collapsed. Its body hit the ground with enough force to shake loose snow from the branches above. The forest went still. No growls, no movement, only the ragged breathing of terrified men. Etienne stood over the fallen creature, axe still in hand, chest heaving. Julian trembled beside him, was sank to his knees. Marcel lay motionless. I crawled to him. "Are you hurt badly?" I asked. He blinked slowly. "I am alive," he said. His voice was thin but steady. I turned. The creature lay still on its side, breathless, its body a mass of fur and shadow and the lantern light pooling around it. One of the hunters stepped closer. "Is it dead?" he asked. Etienne nodded, though his voice shook. "It is dead." Another man crossed himself. Will looked out at the trees. "No more running," he said. "No more hiding," Etienne replied. We stood over the fallen creature in stiff silence. No one dared to touch it. No one dared to speak loudly. The forest around us felt larger now, as though waiting. The thing that had stalked the valley lay motionless on the ground, but none of us felt victory. For several long moments, we stood without speaking. The cold tightened around us, and the forest felt as if it held its breath. Lantern light cast uneven shadows across the fallen form. Its features no longer seemed to shift with movement or threat. The fur lay flat. The limbs hung motionless. The eyes, once bright with terrible focus, were dull in the frost. Marcel tried to sit up again. I reached under his arm and helped him to lean against a tree. His breaths came slow, but he stayed conscious. "You saved me," he said to Etienne. Etienne shook his head. "You bought us time. That was enough." Several men knelt beside the wounded. Alain still breathed, though shallowly. The hunter whose arm had been broken grit his teeth against the pain. Julien bound the man's arm as best he could. No one complained or cried out. They worked with quiet urgency, as if afraid to disturb the silence that had settled over the clearing. Guo approached the body. His lantern trembled in his grip, and the light slid over the creature's limbs. He stared with a conflicted expression, part disbelief, part fear, part something more somber. "It looks like a man," he said quietly. "A man with..." He hesitated and swallowed. "With something else on top of him." "No man has claws like these," Etienne said. Guo did not argue. Instead, he knelt and stared closer, trying to make sense of the dark fur, the elongated limbs, the broad chest. He lifted the edge of the fur at the shoulder with the tip of a branch, careful not to touch it. "There are scars," he said. "Old ones, deep ones." Julien stepped closer. "What does that mean?" "It means this thing has lived a long time," Guo said. "Too long." A murmur passed through the men. Some stepped back. Others leaned in. Each man watched the creature as though waiting for it to rise again. But it did not. When Marcel was steady enough to stand with my help, he nodded toward the body. "We take it to the village," he said, "so no one can say we imagined this. So no one can deny what hunted us." Etienne hesitated. "If the villagers see it, some will fall into panic. And if they don't," Marcel said, "we will be chasing shadows for the rest of the winter. People must see what died here." No one disagreed. We bound its limbs with rope cut from packs and placed it on a sledge one of the hunters had brought to carry supplies. Even tied down, the creature felt heavy, as though its mass exceeded what its size suggested. I avoided touching it directly. Something about the stillness of its body felt wrong, as though it had weight beyond flesh. The walk back to the village felt longer than our journey into the forest. Lanterns cast faint cones of light across the snow. The wounded leaned on others. Marcel walked slowly, his head lowered, but his steps steady. The creature's body slid and thumped lightly with each rise in the terrain. No one looked away from it for long. When the first roofs appeared through the trees, men ahead shouted. Lights flickered behind shuttered windows. The bell tower silhouette rose above us. As we entered the square, people began to emerge from their homes. At first, they looked relieved to see us return. Then they saw what we dragged behind us. Gasps spread across the crowd. Mothers pulled children behind them. Some men stepped forward, faces pale. Jean pushed through the onlookers and halted when she saw the creature. Her hands tightened into fists, though her face held no fear, only a grave acknowledgement. "So it is real," she said. "It is dead," Etienne replied. Father Lauren came quickly from the church. He carried a lantern and approached the sledge with a mixture of caution and duty. "Cover it," he said. "Children should not see this." Some villagers were already crying into their scarves. Others stared with frozen expressions, as though their minds refused to accept the sight. A few men stepped forward, anger rising in them, not toward the dead creature, but toward the fear they had endured for months. Guo raised his hands. "We will decide together what must be done, but first, let the hunters rest. They fought for all of us." People stepped aside. The wounded were carried to the inn. Jean guided them inside, barking orders without hesitation. Julien supported the man with the broken arm. I helped Marcel into a chair by the hearth, where he shut his eyes and breathed in slow, measured rhythm. The rest of the village remained in the square. The creature's body lay beneath a heavy cloth, its outline unmistakable even with the covering. After some time, the council called everyone to the church. The building filled quickly. The cold air carried the murmurs of villagers who had not slept and would not sleep soon. Father Lawrence stood before us. "Whatever it was," he said, "it has been stopped. Tonight, no one died. Tonight, the hunters returned." He paused to let the words settle. But we must not allow terror to become a new master. We looked to each other. We remain a village. We will bury our dead, care for our wounded, and move forward with clear eyes. With Step beside him, we will send word to the prefect, he said. Not about wolves, not about superstition. We will tell him that something dangerous lived near our valley and that our hunters ended it. We will speak plainly. He took a slow breath. And after that, we rebuild. The meeting ended without further debate. People left in small groups, speaking quietly, relieved and exhausted. By dawn, the sun cast pale light across Saint-Breuil. The creature's body had been moved to the church shed under lock. The hunters slept in scattered corners of the inn, on benches, in chairs on the floor. Jean remained awake, tending the wounded, boiling water, cleaning blood from coats and hands that I sat by the window of the inn's common room. The frost on the glass began to melt. Smoke drifted from chimneys. The village looked normal again, if only on the surface. Marcel stirred in his chair across from me. "It's over," he said. "Do you believe that?" I asked. He thought for a long moment. "Yes," he said at last. "Whatever stalked us is dead. The valley is quiet. The forest will be only a forest again." His voice carried certainty, exhausted but certain. I looked out at the snow-covered fields, the roofs touched with morning light, the distant line of trees at the ridge. For the first time since I arrived, the village felt open again, not guarded, not shrinking from the shadows. "Classes begin tomorrow," I said. Marcel nodded. "Life begins again." And so it did. The people of Saint-Breuil returned to their work. The hunters healed. The villagers buried Bertrand with solemn respect. The tracks in the fields faded with fresh snowfall. The forest remained still through the winter. I taught my lessons. The children filled the classroom with their quiet laughter. At times I looked toward the tree-line, remembering the creature's gaze and the cold weight of that night. But the days passed, and nothing moved there but birds and wind. Spring arrived. The snow melted. New shoots grew in the fields. The village lived forward. In time, the events of that winter changed into a story the elderly told by the fire. A real story from a real night when fear had stepped out of the forest and when the villagers of Saint-Breuil faced it together. The creature itself remained in the church shed for several weeks, whilst officials from the prefecture came to examine it. They took measurements, wrote reports, and spoke in grave tones about wolves and disease. Eventually, they took the body away. Where it went, I never learned. But I know what I saw. I know what hunted us. And I know that in that winter of 1911, the people of Saint-Breuil stood together against something that should not have existed, and they survived. The schoolhouse still stands. The children still learn. And the forest, though it still grows dark at night, holds no more terror than any other woodland in France. We remember, we honor those who fell, and we live. That is enough.